Alaska Insight is supported in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers just like you. Thank you.
The legislative session is underway, and lawmakers say they're determined to get work done.
We have a very unique responsibility with the conditions that face our state. Lots of opportunities, of course, lots of challenges, lots of areas to agree on, lots of areas to disagree on, lots of areas to find respectful common ground.
What are the caucus priorities, and how will the governor respond to their plans? We're in Juneau to talk with legislative leadership right now on Alaska Insight. Good evening. We're excited to be in the state's capital for this week's episode of Alaska Insight. Lawmakers have been in session in Juneau for a few days now, and tonight we're talking with House and Senate leadership about what the big priorities are and what they hope to accomplish over the next few months. There's a lot to discuss, so we'll get right to it. In the KTOO studio with me tonight is Senate President Republican Senator Gary Stevens of Kodiak and House Majority Leader Republican Representative Chuck Kopp of Anchorage. Welcome, both of you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Laura.
Especially on such a busy week. Really appreciate it. Senator Stevens, start us off. Give us a snapshot of the Senate caucus priorities and your sense of where the big pinch points might be, especially in negotiations with the governor.
Sure. Well, that's a good question to start with. I was just talking with Chuck before we started this about how important it is that the House and Senate leadership are really working together well. We're both bipartisan, Democrats, Republicans, in both of our caucuses. So we met yesterday and pretty much agreed on all the big issues. I think the biggest one that my caucus is really concerned about is education funding, talking about early funding of education, K-12. We know we've had lots of problems in this last year, and the governor did veto it, so anxious to address that again and try and do it early so that our districts know what's going on. Other issues out there, elections reform, we want to talk about that. We want to deal with, several other issues that we're dealing with. The balanced budget, of course, that's a responsibility of our finance committees. We want to deal with permanent fund. There's some changes that we are working with the permanent fund board to try to make there. And then retirement and pension issues. So those are the big ones. And another special one I'm anxious to work on is the Arctic Committee that we've appointed in the Senate.
And are you in negotiations with the governor? Where do you expect that you're going to have to do the most work?
So education funding is going to be difficult. You know, the governor, as I said, didn't veto it last time, so we're hoping that he'll see the reasons to. I mean, everybody who, wherever you're from in Alaska, you know the problems education is facing, K-12. And my district is talking about closing schools. Your district has closed 3 schools, I believe. Other districts are, that's a very hard thing to do. So clearly I think education, K-12 is underfunded. It's time to put some money into it and make those changes.
Representative Kopp, lawmakers started organizing immediately after the election, and as Senator Stevens said, bipartisan coalitions have formed in both chambers. This smooth organization is a departure from recent years. What do you attribute this to, and how do you think it will affect the work in front of you this session?
That's a great question, Laura. I think it's largely attributable to intensive door-to-door campaigns that resulted in thousands of conversations with Alaskans that really identified some unifying themes that were pulling people together and clearly not on the edges of political thought. And it was clear that Alaska wanted their education system, as the senator said, to be have durable, stable, reliable funding for education that could be counted on. Parents wanted teachers to stay in the classroom year after year and not have a high turnover. And it was clear that that was a priority. Also, what was very significantly brought forward was the necessity of recruiting and retaining our workforce so that we had a very reliable education, transportation, public safety infrastructure in our communities. We heard from many individuals on the campaign trail that it was hard for businesses and families to feel like they were ready to relocate to Alaska or to our communities when we were making national news for not having strong education, not having good transportation, or scoring poorly on our public safety record. So being competitive for Alaska as an employer was attractive. The senator mentioned a strong retirement is part of that. It'll certainly be a priority for the House too, and a balanced budget, not paying. Not spending more than we have, and not going into our reserves to pay an outsized dividend, but looking at what's the most responsible dividend that we can afford, not drain our savings. And Senator Stevens said it well: balanced budgets. Those are things that were very unifying. And I would say one more thing, other than education and recruitment and retention of our workforce and balanced budgets. Energy is a really big thing in Alaska right now. Affordable energy. Everybody's concerned about supply and a diverse supply into our energy distribution system, so we're not overly reliant on any one source. And the legislature is going to be looking at a lot of policy issues that I think will help inform Alaska Energy Authority and even our private industries, kind of in a way where they know they can count on some state support and guidance in how we need to outline the next 10, 20 years. So we're really excited about that. I'm personally very excited about the collaborative relationship with the Senate. I was just talking with Senator Stevens before we came in, and the last time it was like this was, I want to say, a little over 4 years ago.
Yes.
But we appreciate the opportunity to work well with the Senate and collaborate with the governor's office too. We definitely want to get some wins together. The governor has some important policy calls. We want to find those wins where we can be pragmatic and let everybody get a chance to get a win and not let these 2 years go by and not have some significant accomplishments for the legislature and the governor's office.
Laura,
yes,
there's
please.
an issue here that Chuck has mentioned, Representative Kopp has mentioned, that I think is really important. Different from prior elections, people have said to me, sure, I want my dividend. I like a big dividend, but I also see my school district suffering, and I'm willing to give up a little bit of my dividend in order to fund our school. So I think that's a major change. In the past, often the dividend has been the big issue, and it's sort of the third rail. If you touch that, you're dead in the legislature. But I think people have accepted the fact that education is maybe more important than the dividend.
And thank you for that clarification and a little more detail. Representative Kopp, I asked the senator to lay out priorities, and you were doing the same thing. Do you see, for the House caucus, are there some different things that you're also focused on that may be different from the Senate, or do you feel like you're very closely aligned? What are those priorities for the House? Are they pretty much in alignment with the Senate?
I feel caucus-wise they're very closely aligned. The senator also mentioned elections reform. I think we'll see a joint effort between the House and the Senate and the governor's administration on passing an elections reform bill. We all know there's some things that can improve how we conduct elections in Alaska. I think that as you have heard, the main things of recruitment and retention of our workforce, making Alaska a competitive employer again, a real reliable vehicle for education funding that doesn't swing like a political pendulum each year, gives school districts some consistency and predictability in funding, really important to the legislature, and staying within a balanced budget structure where we're not overdrawing the percent of market value, 5% draw of the total market value of the fund, and to the greatest extent possible not going into savings is really important to both caucuses. I think collectively that's going to help produce some real public policy wins that are fiscally responsible at the same time, and give our private sector some confidence that we are paying attention to our infrastructure, which makes them feel safe to invest in Alaska, knowing that we are caring about our roads, our our heavy mechanics, our educators, and our public safety in our communities. And I think that, that symbiotic approach is becoming more recognized as being important.
Let's drill down on some of the issues that you've been talking about. The idea of creating a new pension system for government employees and teachers. What kind of a bill do you think you can craft that could survive a veto from Governor Dunleavy?
Sure. Well, Senator Giesel did a bill last year, Senate Bill 88, and she's introducing something very similar again this year. We realize that we simply cannot go too far. We had an old retirement system that I was fortunate to be a part of, and I think you were too, Chuck. And it was a wonderful retirement system, but it was overly generous, so that we still owe billions of dollars for that old system, which we stopped over a decade ago. So we have to find a retirement system that allows people to retire and have a pension, but it's not going to be the old system. I think actually Senator Giesel says that it's not your grandfather's pension. It's something different. And so it has to be payable. It has to be something we can afford, and it's going to be. You have to hear from the experts on whether what we've come up with works or not.
Mm-hmm. Your thoughts?
Yes, Laura. So the pension bill that the House will be carrying, which will be very similar to Senator Giesel's bill, is truly a dramatically different approach to a defined benefit pension than the state experienced pre-2006. It is not there's no health care plan that is guaranteed to the employee. It's just a health savings account so they can buy their own health insurance to bridge them to Medicare when they retire. Secondly, the risk is shared between the retirees, the employers, and the employees by a way of, if the actuary says the projected liability is less than 90% funded, so your total assets fall below 90% of your projected liabilities, then there's levers that kick in that raise contributions, and even the retirees have skin in the game in that their post-retirement pension adjustment, their cost of inflation, can be reduced to keep the plan at 90%. This is a plan that's been modeled in several states. It's actuarially very sound, and the total projected plan increased cost through 2039. As of last year, the actuary said that would be just a whisker over $1 billion, like $1.05 billion. So if you wrote a check today, present value, that's $646 million, or about $45 million a year. We know that the Governor Dunleavy, which I fully support him doing an incentive for just teachers, a recruit and retention of our teachers. He has a plan that's $60 million a year just to recruit and retain one job class. The pension that we're proposing, as the senator said, is not the gilded, not the gilded one, but is much more fiscally responsible, and will not bring back the debt, as you said, from the previous. And that debt is projected to be paid off like a mortgage payment in 2039. So the state is doing well on its old pension. And the new one that's being introduced is dramatically different, shared risk, and we believe will be something that I think once everybody understands it, we can get the governor's support on it, and otherwise we wouldn't be advocating. But we think the House and the Senate together will get some wins there.
All right, Senator Stevens, Republicans in the Senate have enough members to organize the caucus this session, and they have enough to block three-quarter vote, like spending from the Constitutional Budget Reserve. How will that affect the dynamics this session? What should we expect things to be different?
That's a good question. We have a minority of 6, and of course they could stop us on a three-quarter vote. But I don't think we're going to need a three-quarter vote. Our savings, it is so limited that it's only like $3 billion in savings, and the governor's projected in this budget, which is totally unreasonable, using half of that and only leaving another $1.5 billion for the future. So we simply can't do that. And while we're on that subject, the governor's enormous permanent fund dividend, and including the drawdown of the savings, is just not practical. We simply can't go there. So the governor it's his job to present us with a budget. He did that. Now we have to work through the details and help everyone to understand that there's a limit to how much money we have.
Yes, absolutely. Let's move to energy. Representative Kopp, energy supplies for the rail belt communities, as you know, Fairbanks to Anchorage to Kenai, 75% of the state's population. Shortages looming for Cook Inlet gas in just a few years. What do you think can be done to address this constraint that avoids importing expensive LNG, or is that just inevitable at this point?
I think we are going through the work of discovering whether it's inevitable or not right now by looking at everything from the Bradley Lake Power Project and the Dixon Diversion, which is going to bring 50% more power than they're producing now into the grid. They do provide more than 10% of the entire rail belt's power. There is a number of projects that are currently in front of the Energy Committee in the House that could end up significantly extending the life of the Cook Inlet Basin. We're looking at royalty relief for Hex Fury. They have said they have found a significant amount of gas, but it's a lot of capitalization costs to get a drill rig and drill it out. And they said with a little royalty relief, they're convinced they can provide another 5 or 6 years of gas. In fact, they signed a contract with NSTAR saying that we know where it's at, we still have to get it, and we're going to need a little royalty relief. But extending out that timeline in the Cook Inlet Basin actually allows the producers to find more gas. But to do that, we do need to bring in more of a diverse sources of power. Some of what the Alaska Energy Authority is doing right now is looking at, they've already been awarded significant grants to upgrade our transmission lines between Homer, Soldotna, Sterling, and Anchorage. We have a 20% power loss on our lines. Imagine if you could save 20% power because our lines are so old. But so upgrading our lines will be using less power. There are a number of projects out there that would bring power into the grid. West Susitna access, there's Alaska Energy Authority is looking at clean coal power out there, hundreds of years worth of coal. They could, big power generation plants that use clean coal technology that would be just a few years to get those online versus, some projects are 7, 10, 15 years. So there's a number of things out there. But if we have to import, the utility companies, it's their job to make sure
they've got the gas.
That we don't freeze up. And I wish we could all be like Kodiak, where the senator lives, where they have, your 100% renewable power?
100% renewable, but only because the state was generous and helped us to put in that the dam, and the hydro project. So I think an important issue is that we're all in this together. I mean, my community is doing well. Other communities are not. Homer is in my district. They would be affected. Seward would be affected. So, yeah, we all have to work together to make this work. And, there are worse things than having to import gas for a limited amount of time. Some of the projects, as you mentioned, we're talking about years and years. So if there is a brief time in between our projects coming online and now where we have to import gas, worse things can happen.
Mm-hmm.
Well said.
Let's talk about the prospect of a gas line. Alaska has longed for an LNG line for decades. A Fairbanks resident sent me a headline from the Fairbanks Daily News Miner from the 1950s, touting a gas line. Do you have faith that this new effort could get it done? Representative Kopp, your thoughts?
Hope springs eternal. I would love to see that for Alaska, not only because of the long-term energy delivery to Fairbanks and all of then South Central, but for the jobs, the economy. A mega project certainly would revive our economy. I think we need to carefully vet it, to learn what the economics are of the project, who the buyers would be, does the wellhead value of a delivered gas product minus all the costs of transportation to whichever country it's going to, does it make sense in the world market with the other LNG export that we know is going on? We're being asked to approve capitalization of $50 billion, and there's a lot of energy projects that also would say, well, would you please consider me? I have a shorter timeline and I'm a sure thing. So that's kind of the politics of it. But would we like a gas line? Yes, we would love a gas line.
Yes,
but
that's a pretty simple yes.
yeah,
for sure.
yeah. But vetting it and making sure that it's the best thing for Alaska to do right now, as far as that level of commitment, is what's happening right now. And I'm certainly, like I said, hope springs eternal. We'll see.
Well,
and we should
yes,
say, too,
Senator,
that,
I did want you to
the
weigh in on that.
President Trump has been very supportive
Yes.
of Alaska and the gas line, and I hope that turns into some financial assistance. I mean, you talked about the money that we're being asked to put into it and whether we can afford that or not, but if it becomes a national issue, then maybe funds will be available with our funds to actually accomplish it.
Yes, I know that Senator Bethel's Senator Democrat Lyman Hoffman had said, will the federal government pony up if they're...
Exactly.
Yeah, Laura, that's a great question, and Senator Stevens just hit the nail on the head. President Trump has said it is a national security energy project critical to the domestic energy supply of the United States. And as Senator Stevens has just said, if that's true, then we would love to see the economic support for that progress from our national government. I mean, we would love to have that be a priority for the United States.
yes.
Yeah.
Senator Stevens, President Trump signed a slew of executive orders in his first couple of days. One rolled back many of the restrictions the Biden administration had put in place on land and water to limit oil and gas production. President Trump said he wanted to unleash Alaska's extraordinary resource potential. The order opens the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, more of the National Petroleum Reserve, revives the Ambler Road and other projects. Will this matter? What kind of effect do you think that will have on the industry? Will they come if the door is open?
Well, we can only hope, and we will see. So I really applaud the president in making those changes. On the other hand, we have to make sure that we protect our natural resources, and it's not like we're allowing anybody to come in and destroy Alaska.
As Senator Giesel said, we're not a colony.
We're not a colony, not anymore, since the Russians left, and so we really need to make sure that the waters and the land are protected, and we will do that. We have the power to do that. The state of Alaska has the authority to do that. So certainly applaud the president in most issues. I don't really like his comments on Denali, but I think we will take umbrage at that, renaming Denali. But other than that, the issues that he was talking about are very, very important, and I'm glad he's done what he has done.
Your thoughts, Representative Cobb?
I would second what Senator Stevens said. I'm very excited about the philosophical change of Alaska being looked at for its resource potential, which can be a tremendous asset to the United States at a time when there's a lot of global uncertainty. And so whether it's critical minerals or oil and gas, it is, the mindset is being switched from keeping Alaska locked up as a national park to realizing that responsible resource development is in our national security interest. And as Senator Stevens said, that Alaska has always done a great job at protecting the environment. That doesn't mean we're going to be using that as an excuse for poor development practices. But it's an exciting time for Alaska. I think for our jobs, economy, for industry, it should be a good 4 years for Alaska.
Senator Stevens, another executive order signed by President Trump just froze $132 million in clean energy projects for rural Alaska. Hydro, solar, wind, including 2 large wind turbine projects in Kotzebue that are now in limbo. Tribes were awarded these grants and now they're on hold. How disruptive will this be for advancing energy and infrastructure projects, especially in rural Alaska? Is there anything the state can do?
Well, certainly it could be quite disruptive, and we work very closely with our congressional delegation, our 2 senators and our new representative, and we will continue to do that, and hopefully they can have an impact on those decisions. But yes, it could be quite disruptive.
Mm-hmm. Representative Kopp, do you have anything you'd like to add there?
Yes, I think sources of power for rural Alaska are critical. They're rare. That's why we have power cost equalization, right? Is because it is hard for affordable energy to be delivered to rural Alaska. So this does concern me. I do think that particularly our tribal communities, villages in areas around the state that have renewable power, clean energy, that should be a high priority of our government. I'm not familiar if they were frozen like permanently or frozen to study or to be renewed. I'm not that familiar with the whole policy call there, but it does concern me that if projects are being advanced and awards already given, that we would stop power, that the traditional power of shipping diesel fuel out or other ways is very, very expensive. If we can keep our communities powered with clean energy, that's what's in Alaska's interest.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you both so much for taking time to be here this evening when I know it's a very, very busy time for you. So I appreciate that you came in and to visit with us and talk to Alaskans.
Well, thank you, Lori. Good to see you, and I hope you come back at the end of session to see how we did.
I would love to do that.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, Laura. It's been great to be here.
Thank you for being with us. There are big issues facing our state that require collaboration and thoughtful decisions for ensuring the future economic, social, and cultural health of Alaska. You heard some of the top legislative priorities this evening. Remember, it's up to all Alaskans to make their voices heard with their elected officials. The first session of the 34th Alaska Legislature is now underway. Engage in democracy and make sure your community's needs are known. That's it for this edition of Alaska Insight. Visit our website, alaskapublic.org, for breaking news and reports from our partner stations across the state. While you're there, sign up for our free daily digest so you won't miss any of Alaska's top stories of the day. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Lori Townsend. Good night.